My ranch sat on the edge of a town that had forgotten how to mind its own business. Whispering Cedars wasn't exactly known for peace and quiet despite its name. It was a polished neighborhood built on old soil. What used to be wide open land grazed by cattle was now divided into cul-de-sacs and governed by a group of self-appointed rule-makers called the Whispering Cedars Homeowners Association. They dressed like bureaucrats but acted like royalty. They called themselves caretakers of the community. I called them trouble. I wasn't always the kind of man who looked for fights. But after you've had your land stolen once and your rights trampled twice, you start to draw some lines in the dirt. My ranch was on the last untouched edge of Whispering Cedars. 60 acres of history that hadn't yet bowed to stucco fences and laminated newsletters. It had been in my family since my grandfather laid the first foundation with his own 2 hands. It had survived droughts, wildfires, even a tornado once. But I wasn't sure it would survive the HOA. They had been circling for months. First came the letters. Envelopes printed in smiling fonts with hidden threats. Code violations, they said. Fines accumulating daily. Then came the complaints. Too much noise, too many visitors, too many motorcycles. The last one stung a bit. The motorcycles belonged to my friends. Not just friends, brothers. The Iron Oath Riders. Now, before you start drawing your own conclusions, let me be clear. The Riders weren't some criminal outfit tearing up highways and starting bar fights. We were veterans, most of us. Retired lawmen, ranchers, blue-collar grinders. We rode to remember what it meant to be alive. We gathered at my ranch because it was one of the few places left where we could breathe without someone telling us we were too loud, too different, too much. When the HOA started sending their little warnings, I ignored them. When they escalated to threats, I responded the way I always had. I invited them for coffee. They declined. When they started calling the sheriff, I knew they were up to something more. The sheriff was an old buddy of mine. He stopped by one day, half in uniform, half in disbelief. "They're pushing hard, Jack," he said. "Said you're disturbing the peace. Said there's gang activity out here." He scratched his beard and looked around at the parked Harleys and the smoker's pit. "You know, I don't believe that crap," he said. "But they're pushing it up the county ladder. Someone's itching to make a show out of this." I asked him if there was any legal basis. He said not a damn bit. But that didn't stop people like HOA President Susan Hartford. That woman had a look in her eye like she hadn't smiled since 1987. She came from some cold-blooded corporate background, retired early, bought 3 properties in the neighborhood, and somehow climbed her way into the president's seat like it was Congress. Her mission wasn't to protect property values. It was to control every inch of land her gaze could touch. I remember the first time she visited my ranch. She pulled up in a Lexus with 2 board members in tow, both wearing matching blazers like they were heading to a courtroom. They stepped out without asking permission and stood in my driveway like they owned it. "Mr. Callahan," she said with a tone that could have frozen boiling water, "we need to talk about your gatherings." I leaned against the porch post and sipped my coffee. "You mean my barbecues?" She didn't smile. "This isn't a zoned recreational property. It's not an event space. The traffic, the noise, the flags. It's disruptive." I looked at her. "My ranch predates this entire neighborhood. You bought homes around it knowing it was here. I haven't changed a thing." She nodded slightly. "But times change. Standards evolve. We have to maintain harmony." I tipped my head. "Harmony? Is that what you call telling grown men when they can and can't visit a friend?" "You've been warned, Mr. Callahan." Repeatedly. "If this continues, we will be forced to take further action." I didn't respond. Just watched her get back into her car and drive away. That was 2 weeks before the raid. The day started like any other. Blue sky, hot sun, coffee on the porch. A few of the boys were already there. Mike Two-Tap Harris was tuning his ride in the shade. Red stood at the grill early, already prepping ribs for the evening. It was supposed to be a quiet one. Nothing fancy. Just brothers' food stories. I noticed the SUV before I heard it. Not a police cruiser. Black, unmarked, tinted. It pulled up slow, then stopped halfway down the gravel road. Doors opened and 6 men stepped out. They wore navy blue windbreakers with silver badges sewn onto the chest. HOA security. That phrase alone should be a contradiction. But in Whispering Cedars it was treated like gospel. The HOA had hired a private firm to patrol the community. Originally they were supposed to watch for suspicious activity like package theft or vandalism. But over time their power had grown. Now they walked around with radios, utility belts, and printed tickets like mini cops. They weren't sworn officers, but they acted like it. And today they looked like they came with a purpose. I stood up as they approached. They didn't even knock. They walked straight past the gate and onto my land. The one in front was tall, lean, with sunglasses and a clipped beard. He held a clipboard in one hand and a walkie in the other. "This is an enforcement inspection," he said without introducing himself. "You are in violation of multiple HOA statutes, including but not limited to unauthorized gatherings, noise pollution, and failure to comply with previous warnings." I narrowed my eyes. "This is private property. You have no right to be here without a warrant." He didn't flinch. "We're authorized under Section 14 of the Whispering Cedars Covenant Charter. You signed the agreement when you purchased the property." I smiled. "No, I didn't. This land is exempt. It was grandfathered out decades ago. Your jurisdiction ends at the boundary marker back there. This is my land, not your playground." The man's expression darkened. "We've received reports of illegal activity. We have probable cause to inspect the premises." I stepped forward. "If you take one more step, I'll consider it trespassing." That's when the tension broke. One of the other security guys reached for something on his belt. I didn't see what it was, maybe a baton, maybe just a flashlight, but Mike moved faster. He stepped out from behind the shed holding a wrench the size of a crowbar. "Is there a problem?" he asked. Red came up behind him, wiping his hands on a towel. He didn't say anything, just stood there. Then more of them started showing up. One by one, the riders who had arrived early stepped out of the barn, the garage, the backfield. Silent, calm watching. Leather vests, faded patches, arms crossed. The HOA cops froze. They hadn't expected a welcoming committee. They had come thinking they were going to slap some fines on an old man and leave. Instead, they found themselves face to face with the Iron Oath riders. I stepped forward again. "I gave you a chance to leave civilly. Now you have two choices. Turn around or call the real police and explain to them why you just trespassed onto a legally protected property." The man with the clipboard looked around. He saw the eyes. He felt the weight of the moment. His fingers tightened on the walkie, but he didn't raise it. "We'll be back," he muttered. I nodded. "Bring a warrant next time." They backed off, got into their SUV and left without another word. The silence lingered after they were gone. Mike looked at me. "They're not gonna stop, are they?" "No," I said. "They're just getting started." That night we didn't celebrate. We planned. Because when someone comes to your land pretending to be the law without the badge or the honor, you don't wait for them to strike again. You prepare. And the Iron Oath riders had been preparing for war a long time. The next day the air on the ranch felt different. Even though the sun was bright and the sky clear, there was something heavy pressing down. The kind of pressure that sits on your chest before a storm. We didn't talk about it much over breakfast. Everyone was quiet, chewing slow, sipping coffee slower. When men like us go silent, it's not because we have nothing to say. It's because we're thinking through every angle and waiting for the first one to move. Red was the first to break the silence. He stood at the grill flipping pancakes with one hand and staring out at the main road with the other. He hadn't said a word since the HOA security drove off yesterday, but now his voice cut through like a blade. "They'll be back," he said. "Sooner than we think." Mike nodded and leaned forward across the table. "We gotta assume they're building a case. They'll spin yesterday's stunt into some kind of obstruction claim. They'll try to say we threatened them." I stirred my coffee and looked toward the tree line. I grew up with land that was defended, not debated. When someone tried to take something from you, you didn't send a letter, you stood on the line and made your intentions clear. These people weren't from that world. They had meetings and committees and rules carved in vague legalese. But I wasn't going to let that confuse the simple truth. My land was not theirs. I called the county office that morning. Asked for any formal complaints against the ranch. There were 3. One listed noise violations dated 2 weeks back. Another cited suspicious gatherings and claimed potential gang activity. The third was the one that mattered. It was a formal request from the Whispering Cedars HOA for code enforcement inspection citing community safety and nuisance concerns. It had been filed just 3 days ago but escalated fast. Which meant someone had influence. Susan Hartford. Her name wasn't on the form, but her fingerprints were all over it. She had been trying to box me in for months. What she didn't understand was that I didn't box easy. I called my lawyer next. Retired Marine turned legal shark. His name was Dean Madsen. He picked up after one ring and didn't even wait for my full story. "They sent private security onto your land without a warrant?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "And they threatened inspection?" "Yes." "Good," he said. "You've got grounds? Do you want to sue?" "Not yet. I want to be ready when they come again." Dean gave me a list. Documents to print, boundaries to mark, copies of old zoning exemptions, and one particularly important thing to display clearly on the ranch gate. A large laminated sign that said in plain black letters, "Private property. No trespassing. Entry without warrant is a violation of state law." I printed 3 of them and posted one at each entrance. The message was clear now. The HOA had made their move. Now it was our turn. By noon we had a plan. Red and Mike coordinated watch schedules. We weren't expecting trouble immediately, but we weren't going to be caught flat-footed. We had eyes on the gate 24/7. Half the riders stayed the night. The others rotated in shifts. This wasn't a campout anymore. It was a perimeter. I walked the fence line that evening just before sundown. My boots kicked dust as I traced the edge of the ranch. Every 100 feet I checked the posts. Not because I thought they were damaged, but because walking it helped me think. This was my home. Not just a piece of land. It held memories in the soil. My father teaching me how to rope a calf. My mother planting sunflowers that bloomed too early every spring. My brother's ashes scattered at the South Hill. It was more than dirt and wood. It was sacred. And now it was under siege. That night around the fire the riders shared stories. Not just about the HOA but about their own battles. Mike had faced a crooked city inspector once who tried to shut down his auto shop because he wouldn't pay under the table. Red talked about losing his first house to eminent domain when the city wanted to build a shopping center. Each of us had tasted this kind of fight before. The kind where power hides behind forms and policies instead of fists. But we all agreed this one felt different. More personal. More targeted. Around midnight we got our first sign. A drone. It buzzed in low above the barn, quiet but not silent. Mike spotted it first. He pointed without speaking. We all looked up. The blinking red light moved slow, then hovered. I grabbed the scope from the porch and zeroed in. Black frame, lightweight, commercial grade, probably less than 2 pounds. But it had a camera. And it was aimed at the main house. You want me to knock it down? Red asked. No, I said. Let it see what it needs to see. Let them know we're not hiding. The drone stayed for 3 minutes, then zipped away to the east. Toward the residential blocks. We didn't follow it. We didn't have to. It would be back. This was part of the game now. Surveillance. Intimidation. Pushing boundaries to see how far they could go before we pushed back. The next morning a letter was taped to the gate. No envelope. Just a printed memo with the HOA logo at the top. Read. To the occupant of 431 Timber Ridge Ranch. You are hereby notified that your continued non-compliance with community standards has been documented. Unauthorized activities including unlawful gatherings, drone interference, and obstruction of community inspections are in violation of Charter Protocol. Continued resistance may result in legal escalation and removal proceedings in cooperation with county enforcement. Signed. Susan Hartford. President, Whispering Cedars HOA. I read the letter 3 times, then folded it and handed it to Red. He read it once and tore it clean down the middle. So they're skipping the laws now, he said. Just jumping to threats. I nodded. They're bluffing. But not for long. We needed information. That evening I asked one of the younger riders to dig into the HOA's private security team. His name was Jax. Tech genius, tattoos up both arms and a laptop always in his backpack. He started digging the moment I handed him the letter. Within an hour he had something. The security group was called Dominion Response. A private contractor hired by over 30 high-end communities across the state. Their job was to provide presence, visibility, and deterrence. But here's where it got interesting. Dominion had been cited twice in the last year for overreach. Once for detaining a delivery driver without cause and once for physically removing a tenant from a property they weren't authorized to enter. In both cases charges were dropped but settlements were paid. Which meant they were dangerous, sloppy, and used to pushing limits. They're used to people backing down, Jack said. They don't expect resistance. Then they picked the wrong ranch, I said. Over the next 2 days the pressure escalated. More drones. Parked cars sitting at the edge of the property pretending to be lost. Once a man in a windbreaker was caught walking along the back fence with binoculars. Red approached him from behind and politely walked him off the land without saying a word. We didn't make noise. We didn't send threats. We just watched and waited and documented everything. That weekend we held a riders' meeting. Not just the core members but every chapter within 3 counties. They came in waves. Dozens of bikes rolling up the long gravel road, their engines like thunder shaking the morning calm. It wasn't about numbers. It was about unity. Message. They think they're picking off a lone man, I told the group. Let's show them he's not alone. We parked every bike in a formation near the barn. Banners draped across the front porch. And for the first time since the HOA started this war we opened the ranch to the public. Friends, neighbors, veterans, farmers, and a few quiet supporters who lived in Whispering Cedars but hated what the HOA had become. We called it Heritage Day. No speeches, no protests, just a big barbecue with music, laughter, and an open gate policy for anyone who respected the land. Over 400 people showed up. The local paper sent a reporter. Photos were taken, stories were shared, and more than one HOA member watched from a distance in quiet frustration. We made sure it was clean, legal, and calm. The kind of event no ordinance could touch. And just like that, the narrative began to shift. We weren't a nuisance anymore. We were defenders, stewards, neighbors. The HOA had tried to paint us as dangerous outsiders. But now people saw who we really were. That night Susan Hartford drove past the ranch slowly. She didn't stop. Just watched from her car with a face like stone. She saw the bikes, the people, the banners. She saw that her threats hadn't scared anyone. And then she saw me standing at the gate with Red and Mike at my side. She didn't wave. I didn't blink. As her car disappeared down the hill, I turned to Red. "Next time it won't be letters or drones," I said. "No," he replied. "Next time it'll be boots. And we'll be ready," I said. Because the line was drawn now. And we weren't moving. The quiet after Heritage Day didn't last long. It never does when you stand your ground in a place built on conformity. For 3 days no one from the HOA made a move. No letters, no patrols, no drones. But that silence wasn't peace. It was calculation. They were regrouping, studying, waiting for us to lower our guard. They didn't understand that men like us don't lower our guard. We sharpen it. On the 4th day after the gathering, a certified envelope arrived by courier. No HOA letterhead this time. County office seal on the front. Inside was a formal complaint filed through the Department of Code and Ordinance Enforcement. The language was dry, but the meaning was clear. The HOA had gone around us and pushed the county to take over. The complaint listed over a dozen violations. Unauthorized structures, excessive occupancy, unpermitted waste disposal, improper use of agricultural land for social functions. Each one was nonsense, but framed just right to catch the attention of bureaucrats who didn't know the difference between a hay shed and a barbecue pit. Red read the list aloud, shaking his head with every line. "Unpermitted structure," he muttered. "That's the chicken coop. It's been there 15 years. Improper land use. That's what they say when they don't like what you do with your own dirt," I said. Mike pulled out the zoning exemption paperwork. "This land isn't under HOA jurisdiction and it's still zoned for multi-use private agricultural operations. You've got grandfather protection, Jack." "They're ignoring that," I said. "They're trying to force a county inspection so they can get inside." That was the strategy. If they couldn't force their own people onto the property, they'd call in someone with legal authority to do it for them. I called Dean, my attorney, again, and he confirmed it. The county wasn't taking sides. They were responding to a complaint. But the second an inspector stepped foot on the ranch with a clipboard in hand, anything they didn't like could turn into a shutdown order. So we prepared again. This time with paper. We took photos of every structure, labeled each one with dates of construction, permits where applicable, and declarations from neighbors who had seen them standing for years. We printed maps, boundary surveys, agricultural use exemptions, and even a notarized letter from a local historian confirming the ranch's age and legacy designation. By the time we were done, the file we put together could have passed for a legal textbook. But we didn't stop there. Because we knew paperwork wasn't enough. The HOA wanted a show. So we gave them one. We hosted another event, this time for local veterans. We called it Unity Ride. Over 60 former service members showed up. Not all bikers. Some came in pickup trucks, others on foot. We kept it clean again, but made our point. That ranch wasn't just a place for men with engines and patches. It was a place for anyone who had bled for this country and deserved to breathe free on American soil. The HOA sent 2 drones that time. Both of them flew lower than before. Jax caught the signal on a scanner he had rigged together and traced the flight path. The launch point was a house 3 blocks from the edge of the ranch, owned by one of the HOA board members. He cross-referenced the homeowner with a list of formal complaints. Same name on 3 of them. So now we had proof of surveillance and direct harassment. Dean filed a restraining order against unauthorized drone surveillance within 100 yards of the property. That went straight to the county office along with the compiled documents and the signed letters from neighbors. It slowed the process, but it didn't stop what was coming. 2 days later, the county sent a notice of inspection. Official seal date and time included. No mention of law enforcement, but the letter said failure to comply could result in legal penalties. That was the first time I felt the heat rise in my chest. Not anger. Anticipation. Because this was it. The test. They were coming with clipboards and pens, but we knew what it really meant. They were coming to find anything they could twist. The morning of the inspection, the sun rose early and sharp. No clouds. The wind still. At 7:30 we were already up. Coffee brewed, tools put away, paths cleared. The riders lined the fence, but not as guards. As witnesses. I stood at the main gate with Dean on one side and Jax on the other. Mike and Red posted on opposite flanks. Everyone knew their role. No threats. No noise. Just presence. At 8:15 a Silver County vehicle pulled up. Two men stepped out. One wore a shirt with an embroidered seal and carried a clipboard. The other had a small camera and a neutral face. They walked up slow, careful, deliberate. I opened the gate before they could knock. "You're here for the inspection," I said. The man with the clipboard nodded. "Name's Martin Price. This is my associate Leon. We're with County Code Enforcement. You got the paperwork?" He handed it to Dean, who skimmed it fast and nodded. "You can proceed. But we'll be documenting everything and we won't be answering speculative questions." "Understood," Martin said. They walked the path slow, took pictures, measured fences, looked at sheds. Leon asked for access to the barn. I opened it. They took photos of tools, feed bins, and old tractor. Nothing was hidden. Nothing was out of place. It took an hour and 40 minutes. No citations issued on the spot, but Martin said we'd get a full report within 7 days. After they left, we gathered at the porch. Nobody spoke until Dean did. They were looking for something. Didn't find it. But they're not done. I'd bet money that HOA filed a follow-up complaint the minute those guys left. He was right. 3 days later, another notice arrived. This one not from the county. It was from Dominion Response, the private security firm under HOA contract. The letter stated that due to increased community concerns, a coordinated presence would be established around the property perimeter to ensure safety and compliance during ongoing dispute resolution. That was their way of saying they were sending patrols. Not inside, but close enough to intimidate. That same afternoon, 3 Dominion vehicles parked along the southern edge of the property. Unmarked black SUVs, no visible weapons, but the men wore tactical vests and earpieces. They stood at the fence line with binoculars, watching, waiting. One of them took photos. Another appeared to be logging notes on a tablet. Red stood by the fence with a cigarette between his lips. Not moving. Just watching. Mike sat on a bench nearby, casually cleaning a wrench. Jax walked the perimeter with a camcorder, recording everything. They didn't cross the line. But they didn't need to. Their presence was a provocation. We responded by hosting a town forum. Not at the ranch. At the local VFW hall. Open to the public. No politics. Just facts. We showed documents, video footage, drone paths, timestamps. We played clips of Dominion agents patrolling our fence. We read the HOA letters aloud. The audience included local press, some county officials, and a few Whispering Cedars residents who had never liked the HOA but were too afraid to say so until now. By the time we were done, the narrative had changed again. The HOA wasn't a guardian of order anymore. It was a private power trying to police land it didn't own, using tactics it wasn't allowed to enforce. The next morning, I got a call from a local news anchor. She wanted to do a piece. Not a hit job. A real story. I agreed on one condition. She had to visit the ranch in person. She arrived with a cameraman and interviewed me on the porch. Then she talked to Red, Mike, and a few neighbors. She toured the barn, met the riders, saw the signs and the boundaries. The story aired 2 nights later. And when it did, Susan Hartford's name was finally dragged into the light. The segment showed her signature on the original complaints. Her direct involvement in the drone purchases. Her position on the HOA board when the Dominion contract was approved. And then it cut to a county council meeting where she argued that ranch land like mine should be reclassified for suburban development. The phones lit up the next day. Messages from supporters, local businesses, veterans, even a few HOA members who were done staying silent. We didn't throw a party. We didn't gloat. Because we knew what was next. Desperation. When people with power start losing control, they stop playing by the rules. They try to break something, anything, just to feel like they still matter. And sure enough, 2 days later, just past midnight, the alarms on the east fence tripped. Not animals. Not wind. Movement. Human. Red was the first to respond. He caught 2 figures near the back gate. Dressed in black, trying to cut through a chain. He called out. They ran. But not before Jax's cameras caught their faces. Not just random vandals. HOA board members' teenage son and one of his buddies. We filed a report. Dean made sure it went to both the sheriff and the county. The sheriff called personally. Said he'd handle it. Said this had gone too far. I agreed. But I also knew something else. The HOA wasn't done. They had thrown everything short of force at us. And failed. Now there was only one thing left they could try. Send their fake cops right through the gate. It happened on a Wednesday morning with the kind of sky that didn't give away a thing. No wind, no birds, no sound beyond the occasional creak of an old gate and the muffled rumble of engines far off down the road. We were up before sunrise like always. Red was in the barn tightening a loose beam on the hay loft. Mike was on the east trail checking the motion sensors that lined the fence. I was sitting on the porch watching steam rise from my coffee. That silence had become familiar over the past few weeks. It was a signal more than a sound. Whenever things got too quiet for too long, something was always building beneath the surface. We knew it. We all did. It had been 29 days since the inspection. 6 drone flights logged, 4 surveillance vehicle visits, and 2 more attempts at fence sabotage by HOA-connected teenagers. We had filed every report, documented every trespass, recorded every suspicious movement. The county knew. The sheriff knew. The press had aired 3 separate segments about the situation. But none of it slowed the machine behind the Whispering Cedars HOA. They weren't chasing code violations anymore. They were chasing control. And people like Susan Hartford didn't take well to being exposed. The stories had tarnished her image but not her grip on the board. She still held the reins. And from what Dean told me, her latest move was something more aggressive than anything we had seen before. She had filed a formal request for emergency enforcement. The grounds cited were community safety, suspicion of organized illegal activity, and the presence of armed vigilantes. The request had been denied by the sheriff's office. But she had a backup plan. At exactly 7:24 a.m., a convoy of 5 black vehicles turned off the main road and began rolling toward the front gate of my ranch. I saw them as soon as they made the turn. 2 SUVs in the lead, then a dark van and 2 more behind it. No sirens, no markings, no lights. Just a straight, slow crawl toward our land. I stood up from the porch and walked down to the gate. My boots stirred dust across the gravel. Red appeared beside me with a wrench still in one hand. Mike came jogging in from the east trail, his jacket half unzipped and his eyes sharp. Jax followed with his phone already recording. More riders emerged from the barn and the backyard. Silent, alert, steady. Not a sound between us. The vehicles came to a stop 50 feet from the gate. Doors opened. Men stepped out. They wore tactical vests, dark uniforms, and radios strapped to their shoulders. No visible guns, but utility belts full of gear. They weren't county deputies. They weren't federal. These were private operatives. Dominion Response. The HOA's personal enforcers. One of them stepped forward holding a folded sheet of paper. I could tell he wanted to announce something. Probably rehearsed it in the mirror. But before he could speak, I held up a hand. "You're trespassing," I said loud and clear. "This is private land. You've been warned. You've been served notices. You've been told to stay off this property without a warrant." The man unfolded the paper and raised it slightly. "We're here under directive to enforce a health and safety inspection," he said. "Immediate access is required. You are non-compliant with multiple public safety concerns." "That's a lie," I said. "You're not law enforcement. You're not inspectors. You're corporate muscle hired by a corrupt HOA president to intimidate landowners. We have the documents to prove it. We have recorded complaints," the man said. "Community fears. Reports of aggressive behavior. And you've been caught breaking the law 6 times in the last month," I replied. "Illegal surveillance. Fence tampering. Trespass. You want to escalate this, then do it. But know what's waiting behind this gate." The man glanced past me. I didn't turn to follow his eyes. I already knew what he was looking at. Over a dozen men standing in the yard, all in black leather dust-covered boots, iron patches stitched into their vests. The Iron Oath Riders. Not a gang, not a militia, not a threat. A brotherhood of men who had sworn to protect what mattered. And today what mattered was this land. "We don't want conflict," the Dominion agent said. "Then back off," I replied. He hesitated. Then he stepped forward. He crossed the line. That was the moment the breach began. I didn't raise a fist. I didn't shout. I simply turned and stepped back as the riders closed ranks behind me. Red set his wrench on the ground and cracked his knuckles. Mike stood like a wall, unmoving. Jax kept recording silently, stepping backward to keep everything in frame. More Dominion agents moved forward. One started reaching for the latch on the gate. I said again, louder this time, "Back off." He ignored it. Then Red moved. Fast. He stepped between the agent and the gate and with a single swing brought his hand down hard on the latch before the agent could touch it. Not a hit. Not a strike. A warning. But the metal rang out like thunder. The agent flinched and stepped back. I looked him dead in the eye. "You take another step and you'll be liable for everything that happens next. Not just trespass. You'll be violating state law. And we will defend this land with everything allowed to us under that law." The agent paused. His hand moved toward his radio. Then a voice shouted from behind the SUVs. "Stand down." A tall man in a gray suit walked into view. Clean-shaven, cold eyes, silver tie. not dressed like the others. He held a phone in one hand and a briefcase in the other. I recognized him immediately. Alan Breyer, legal counsel for the HOA. I had seen his name on every letter we'd received in the past 30 days. This was his operation. He was the puppet master behind the Dominion raid. He stepped between the agents and the gate and raised his voice so everyone could hear. "You are interfering with a legally authorized operation, Mr. Callahan," he said. "This is obstruction. This is recorded. And it will be used against you." I raised my phone, which had also been recording the entire exchange. "You're bluffing," I said. "You've got no warrant. No authorization. This is a civil matter, not a criminal one. Your contractors have no authority to enforce anything on this property. You're endangering the community," he snapped. "I'm protecting my rights," I replied. He stepped closer. "You're going to regret this." "No," I said. "You are." I turned to Jax. "No." Jax pressed a button on his phone. A loud tone played through a speaker set on the fence. Then a pre-recorded message played. It was Susan Hartford's voice from a voicemail left on a neighbor's phone 2 weeks earlier. She said, and I quote, "If he doesn't comply, we'll send the dogs in. I don't care what the law says. That land will fall." The HOA lawyer's face tightened. Then the next sound cut through the air louder than anything else that morning. Engines. Dozens of them. The rest of the Iron Oath riders rolled up from the East Trail, their Harleys thundering in a perfect column. They had waited until the last moment to arrive. That had been the plan. To show strength when it mattered most. Dominion agents tensed. Some of them reached for their radios, others just stepped back. Breyer stood frozen. I stepped forward one last time. "You came here thinking you could scare us. You thought this ranch was just dirt and fences. But you were wrong. This land is family. It's freedom. And it will not fall. You want a war, then file the papers and see what happens. But if you ever step foot past this gate again without a badge and a warrant, you better be ready for what comes next." Breyer didn't speak. He just nodded once to his men. They turned. One by one they got back into their vehicles. Doors slammed, engines roared, and the convoy rolled back the way it came. We didn't cheer. We didn't taunt. We stood silent. The kind of silence that only comes when you know you've held the line. Dean called that afternoon. He said county officials were furious at the HOA. Said they had crossed a boundary that even the council couldn't defend. There would be hearings now. Lawsuits. Sanctions. But none of that mattered in the moment. What mattered was that the gate still stood. And we were still behind it. Together. After the raid, everything changed, but nothing stopped. Dominion had pulled back their men, but their presence still lingered like smoke after a fire. Word of what happened at the gate spread fast. The footage Jax recorded went online that same night. Over 100,000 views by morning. Headlines called it a standoff between private enforcers and landowners. Others just called it what it was. A power grab that failed. The HOA didn't issue a statement. Susan Hartford disappeared from public view for 3 days. The board went quiet. Emails stopped. Patrols ceased. But we knew that silence didn't mean surrender. It meant they were recalculating. People like Susan don't back down because they know they're wrong. They back down to find another angle. And the next one was already forming. That weekend I received a certified letter delivered by a man in a suit who didn't say a word. The envelope was thicker than usual. Inside were 2 things. A lawsuit and a notice of motion to enforce code violations through county court. The lawsuit claimed I was endangering public safety, harboring a nuisance, operating a facility in violation of community standards, and interfering with lawful enforcement. Attached were statements from 3 HOA board members, including Susan Hartford. All of them filled with exaggerated claims, twisted facts, and carefully omitted truths. I brought the letter into the kitchen where Red Mike and Jax were gathered. "They're trying to bury us under paperwork now," I said. "That's all they've got left," Mike replied. "Words and signatures." Jax flipped through the documents and smiled. They included the drone photos. But they forgot to redact their GPS coordinates. That places the launch point inside their own neighborhood. Dean arrived the next morning. He dropped his briefcase on the table, looked at the lawsuit, and whistled. "They went all in," he said. "But this isn't a lawsuit. It's a bluff. They want to drag this out until you break." "Not happening," I said. He opened his case and pulled out our response. "You're going to countersue. Harassment. Trespass. Unlawful surveillance. Attempted coercion. Filing knowingly false reports to law enforcement. And we're naming names. Including Susan." I looked out the window at the tree line. "Do it." By noon the papers were filed. The court set a hearing date 3 weeks out. In the meantime the HOA went on a public relations campaign. They distributed letters to all Whispering Cedars residents claiming they were under threat from outside forces. They called the riders a gang. They called the ranch a security risk. They warned families to avoid the eastern border of the neighborhood. It was fear-mongering at its worst. But it didn't have the effect they wanted. Too many people had already seen the truth. At least a dozen neighbors came to the ranch personally to apologize for the letters. Some brought food. Some just came to shake our hands. They weren't looking to pick sides. They just didn't want to be lied to anymore. Then something happened no one expected. A member of the HOA board resigned. Publicly. His name was Carl Newton. A retired firefighter. He had been on the board for 6 years. Always kept to the middle. Not loud, not aggressive. He showed up at the gate one afternoon holding a folder under his arm. "I know I should have come sooner," he said. "But I can't keep pretending I don't see what's happening." He handed me the folder. Inside were minutes from HOA meetings that had never been made public. Notes written by hand. Audio transcripts of private discussions. And most importantly, copies of emails between Susan Hartford and Dominion executives where she explicitly ordered surveillance operations despite knowing the legal risks. Carl looked me in the eye. "She's not protecting the community. She's protecting her control. This has to stop." "Well," I said. With Carl's information, Dean expanded the lawsuit. Now it wasn't just a civil case. Now there were criminal allegations. Conspiracy to misuse private enforcement. Coercion. Abuse of authority. The press got wind of it within 48 hours. That week 3 reporters came to the ranch. We gave them everything. Documents, video, audio. They asked us what we wanted out of this. Justice, Red said. Respect, Mike said. Peace, I said. Not silence. Peace. The segment aired on the state network by the end of the week. It hit harder than anything before. Footage of the raid, interviews with neighbors, documents read aloud for everyone to see. Then it cut to a photo of Susan Hartford walking into the HOA offices with Dominion agents beside her. The court hearing was set for the following Thursday. That morning we rode in together. Not with sirens, not with banners. Just quiet wheels on asphalt. 30 riders. Every patch clean. Every man straight-backed. We parked at the courthouse and walked in as one. Inside the courtroom, Susan sat at the table with 2 attorneys. She didn't look at us. Didn't need to. Her silence said enough. The judge asked for opening statements. Her lawyer stood and delivered a speech about law and order and property standards. Said I was defiant. Said I refused to compromise. Said I endangered the safety of others. Dean stood and said one thing. We have proof that this was never about safety. This was about power. He laid the documents on the table one at a time. HOA memos. Dominion contracts. Drone photos with location tags. Video footage of the fence breach. And finally Carl's signed affidavit. The judge read it all. Then he spoke. This court finds that the HOA has acted outside the bounds of its authority in numerous instances. It further finds that Dominion Response engaged in unauthorized enforcement actions at the direction of non-governmental actors. All current violations against the defendant's property are hereby dismissed. Further investigation into the conduct of the HOA board and affiliated parties will proceed under separate review. Susan's face didn't move, but her eyes did. The gavel fell. We walked out slow, calm, steady. The riders behind me. Reporters in front of us. I didn't give a speech. I didn't throw up a fist. I just said one thing. The law still matters out here. And so does the land. That evening we returned to the ranch. There was no celebration. No fireworks. Just laughter. Music. And firewood cracking in the pit. Red cooked ribs. Mike passed out drinks. Jax played old rock from his phone. I stood at the edge of the property and looked at the hills. The fence still stood. The house still stood. And more than that, we stood. Together. If you think that was wild, you haven't seen anything yet. Hit that like button. Subscribe to HOA Confidential. And stay tuned. Because the fight for freedom is just getting started.